is the place. No, really, this is the place. Roger Williams knew this immediately. In 1636, he was looking for a place for a settlement. And he was led to the place right up the street, not 800 feet away. There was a spring, there was a tidal pool filled with game. It was surrounded by 7 hills, just like Rome. And he declared, this is the place. And what I'd like to do this morning is actually talk about that a little bit more so we can understand why that is. So we can preserve that sense of place. Because I think it's our biggest asset. So this is that land that we're all talking about. Those are those hundreds of acres, not hundreds, dozens of acres, let's say, in red that are basically empty right now. We moved the highway to the south there. So we're going to be seeing a lot of new buildings. How do we get those to fit in? How do we get that to preserve our sense of place? So I've been really curious about what everybody else is hoping for and imagining and dreaming for these kinds of lands. So as an architect and a stakeholder, I started going to these zoning meetings that the city was having to shape that zoning and how that's going to shape our city. And as I sat there in all these meetings about discussions about setbacks and building heights and parking requirements, I had an epiphany. Zoning is really boring. And it didn't quite make sense. I couldn't connect why people are so excited about cities and zoning is just so awful. And it made me realize that zoning is actually about setting limits. It's not about possibilities. And what people want to hear about are the possibilities. That's where we dream, and that's where we get emotional. So to tap into some of these emotions, I asked a lot of people some questions about our city and made these word clouds. So on the left is regret, and on the right is delight. Now you can see a lot of things in here. But here's what I saw. People hate buildings, especially mediocre buildings. They love places, especially places for people. And that's the key. This really clicked with me because I'd never really gotten excited about architecture until I realized that it was about creating settings for people. Offices that help people be more innovative, schools that help people learn, basically places that help people realize their own possibilities. So buildings also need people to love them just to succeed. They need investors to fund them. They need officials to give them permits. They need tenants to pay rent. And what's more, the writer Alexander Lange just wrote this great quote, "Architecture is the art you cannot avoid." Architecture means something to all of us. We are all the clients. And because you're the clients and you're the most important person in placemaking, we need to talk. We really need to talk. But to talk, we really need to understand each other. I took this picture in an architecture school. This doesn't help. I barely know what this means, and I don't think it's an appropriate topic for any professional. But really what it's saying there is that you need to understand what architects do, just as we need to understand what you're feeling about a place. So some people will guess at what an architect does. It's like, well, they make blueprints. They make the drawings for a building. And to me, that's a bit like saying a doctor's job is to write a prescription. Like, well, yes, that's true, but you're really hoping they're asking a lot of questions and listening and thinking a lot before they write that prescription, just as you hope that architect's doing a lot of thinking before they make that drawing. Steve Jobs, of course, hits it nail right on the head. Design is a funny word. Some people think design means how it looks, but of course, if you dig deeper, it's how it works. And so from my perspective, that's absolutely true. For me, good architecture is one that takes all those questions of structure and uses and siting and how much energy it uses and brings them together in a way that seems absolutely inevitable. But great architecture is one that's inspired by a vision of that sense of place and actually amplifies it. So I'll show you an example of what that means. This is the Art Museum by Santiago Calatrava in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Now, Milwaukee is not all that different from Providence in a lot of ways. Why I like this building is a couple reasons. It's got these amazing wings that actually move according to the time of the day and how much light there is. It connects back to the city along this path through the historic downtown and brings you right to that waterfront. And it also has a great event hall where people gather and celebrate. And the designers not only understood all these mechanics, but they also understood the magic of that place. And so if this digging deep is the key to great architecture, it's also perhaps the way to understand our city. So I'd like to show you a couple things that you might think of as opposites, but really is that key to understanding why our city has some special magic. Now, we just heard in the last presentation, urban versus green. You may think of green as being hyperinsulation and great thermostats, but I'm going to give you a statistic. Rhode Island routinely ranks as the state with the least amount of energy use per capita. We use the least energy of anybody in this country. And if you're paying attention in the last one, you'll know why. It's because of our urbanness. It's because of our density. Look at this map. We're all clustered around the bay. And what's more, 3/4 of us live within 15 miles of the City of Providence. So that means, of course, we spend less energy on transporting our food and our water around. We spend less energy commuting. And we live in denser housing. We have apartment buildings that take less to heat than a standalone house. And what's more, that clustering allows us to leave more open space for agriculture and for open space. And what's more, this urbanization trend, everybody's starting to really realize this sense of connectedness that cities can bring and the improvement in quality of life. So in my view, Providence is way ahead of the game in terms of sustainability and creating a city-based future. Now this next one is a little more controversial, and we saw it earlier in the conflicts between Moses and Jacobs. Historic preservation versus economic development. I feel like I fight this battle every single day, but on both sides of the battle. Our stereotypical images of the developer, and they're bringing new jobs, and they're growing the tax base, against the preservationists lying in front of the bulldozers and saving our heritage. And it's absolutely true. We have lost some good buildings lately for buildings that never seem to quite materialize. But I think that's just one side of the story. In truth, there's a lot of savvy developers out there that just in the last 10 years have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into the historic properties around our states and created thousands and thousands of jobs. This sense of place is worth real money. So let's cash in. And what's more, let's look at this sense of place and really study it to see what it's doing right. And that leads me to my next topic. Now this can be really tough discussion. I feel like the debate between traditional and modern sometimes gets really polarized, just like politics can be. And it's divisive, and it's not terribly productive. It's kind of like a gasoline fight. Nobody wins. So I hear a lot of times people say, well, this is Providence. It's a brick city. We want traditional brick buildings, not glass and steel. We need brick. It's like, well, let's look at that. So glass and steel. This is a great building filled with light, glass and steel. It was built in 1861. It's the Crystal Palace. This was before a lot of the buildings that we love in Providence were built. Now let's look at some Providence buildings, some of the most beautiful ones. This isn't brick. This isn't brick. That's not brick. That's not brick either. That's not brick. Oh, that's brick. Now, there are a lot of reasons to hate this building. Right? There's not very many windows, the scales, really frightening. Set back from the street, it's got this giant parking lot, but it's brick. So let's agree not to confuse material with style. And let's take this a bit further and agree not to confuse style with architecture. So here's an example, just up the street again. On the right, that's actually a new building, and on the left is the old building it's paired next to. So you can see this is being pretty respectful. It's using that storefront to mimic both sides. But look at the detailing. That's not historic detailing. If this had a personality, it would be pretty quiet and a little bit subversive. So every building does have a personality. And if you think of the city as a giant dinner party, we all need manners and politeness to get along. But ultimately, you really need a good mix of personalities, and sometimes some exuberant ones to make it a good time for everybody. So I see, this is the building we're in right here. I see this is actually very polite. It's got a brick base, it uses brick in a lot of places. The pattern actually indicates a really nice flow on the street. But also, it's kind of like the person next to you who's not afraid to have that third glass of wine and tell you exactly what they think about aluminum. So it's not about age either. This building, it's almost 100 years old, 98 to be specific. It was the technological marvel of its time. Look at those giant glass windows. It uses a really innovative structure with steel from 100 years ago. That is officially termed, if you look up the historic sites, historic early modernism. So tell me, is that traditional or modern? Because I'm not going to be able to tell you. In a way, I don't care, because to me it's very Providence. Now here we are, back over at the Fertile Underground building that you'll hear more about later. And it's taking a lot of cues from its neighbors, but what's up with that roof? Is that a Victorian mansard roof? It sort of is, but it isn't, but it is. Ultimately, I think the best buildings in Providence are going to be those that respect their surroundings, but also aren't afraid to live in the moment. And labeling things with styles like traditional or modern really just gets in the way of seeing what the building is really trying to do. And applying a style label is really kind of irrelevant. I mean, what style is your iPhone? So, hey, we've got all this land, so now where do we go from here? Well, I think we need to figure out a way that we can all help the new buildings that eventually go here amplify our sense of place. So I have a couple tasks for you. First, please notice the city around you. Maybe walk more, bike more. Just look up from your cell phone occasionally. Stare out the window. Really see what's happening around us. And then really key in on the details. Appreciate when you find something beautiful. And then start to think to yourself, why is that? Is it the shape of the window, the size of it? Maybe it's the way that light hits that brick as it curves around. And maybe some of these things are interesting because they stand out or unusual, not because they blend in. What a concept. So then keep your eye out for other moments of that same type of beauty, but maybe where it is a different way. And don't get distracted by these questions of style. Use your senses to figure out what you love about it. And ultimately ask yourself, does this building have a personality? And is it a personality that I want to be around? Ask yourself, not only does this building work well and help me, but does it have a sense of vision? Does it have a sense of place? And then talk about it. Perhaps go on to Greater City Providence and respond to some blog comments. Go to an event at Providence Preservation Society, or go to Pachacacha, or go to a local hearing, or your neighborhood group, and have a dialogue. And really, I think through that process, that's how we're going to keep our sense of place. So, before we get to lunch, because I know everybody wants a grilled cheese sandwich, we're going to do a little exercise here. This is Roger Williams, and so because he looks like he's doing a little bit of a disco move here, we're all going to learn a move called the Raj. So everybody hold up their right hand like this, palm up. Okay, and now give it a little flip. All right, that was awesome. Okay, now on the count of three, we're going to all do that again. Palms back up. And on the count of three, we're all going to chant, "This is the place." So 1, 2, 3. This is the place. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, you get a grilled cheese sandwich on the first try. So what I'd like you to do with that is take that move out to the streets. Find a place where you think this is the place. And have someone take a photo of you doing this, the Raj. What I'd really like for you to do is send me that photo to 195hopes@gmail.com. And also send me a description of why you think that's the place. Really think about it. It could be a couple words, it could be a couple sentences, maybe a book. And what I'd like to do with that is create a collection and collect our communal wisdom about why this is the place. Who knows, maybe we'll make an application to the Cities 2.0. I think that would be great for us all to do. So, in the end, really all I have to say, this is the place.